We often look back at the Roman Empire and see glory. We see the Colosseum, the aqueducts, the perfectly straight roads, stretching for thousands of miles. We see a civilization that built the foundations of our modern world, giving us laws, engineering, and a model for what a superpower could be. But there's a darker side to this story, a side that's often overlooked in our admiration for Rome's achievements. Behind the magnificent facade of marble and might was a system built on one simple, brutal principle: control. For the Romans, order wasn't just important, it was everything. And to maintain that order across a vast empire of millions of people, they relied on a powerful and terrifying tool: fear. Let's be clear. Roman punishments weren't just about justice or rehabilitation. They were a form of public theater, designed to send a crystal-clear message to anyone who even thought about stepping out of line. The goal was to make the consequences of rebellion or crime so horrifying that the average person would choose obedience every single time. Imagine living in a world where the law wasn't just a set of rules, but a constant, looming threat. For most people in the Roman Empire, from the distant provinces to the heart of Rome itself, this was their daily reality. One of the most infamous forms of Roman punishment was, of course, crucifixion. Today, we often associate it with a single religious event. But for the Romans, it was a standard procedure for dealing with slaves, pirates, and enemies of the state. It was a slow, agonizing death, deliberately carried out in public spaces, often along major roads. Why? So that everyone traveling to and from the city would see the price of defiance. It was a gruesome billboard advertising the power of Rome. The message was simple: this is what happens when you challenge us. It wasn't just about punishing the individual. It was about terrorizing the entire population into submission. But it didn't stop there. The Romans had a whole menu of creative and cruel punishments. For lesser crimes, there was public flogging, which could be brutal enough to be a death sentence on its own. For more serious offenses, especially for those who weren't Roman citizens, the options were grim. One punishment was being condemned to the mines, known as damnatio ad mortem. This was essentially a life sentence of hard labor in the dark, dangerous bowels of the earth, where people were worked to death. There was no escape. It was a slow, miserable end, far from the public eye, but well known enough to be a deterrent. Then there were the games de ludi. We think of gladiators, but a huge part of the spectacle was the damnatio ad bestias, being condemned to the beasts. Criminals and prisoners of war would be thrown into the arena, unarmed, to be torn apart by lions, bears, or leopards for the entertainment of the crowd. This turned punishment into a public festival. It desensitized people to violence while reinforcing the state's ultimate power over life and death. The roar of the crowd wasn't just for the spectacle. It was an endorsement of the system. It was a collective agreement that this was necessary to keep order. Even within the military, the legendary Roman legions, discipline was maintained with an iron fist. If a unit showed cowardice in battle, it could face decimation. Today, we're going to dive deep into this fascinating world and uncover how Roman law wasn't just strict, it was a masterpiece of social engineering. Let's start with the basics. The Romans believed in order, and their laws were designed to create and maintain that order above all else. This wasn't about individual feelings or personal freedoms, as we might think of them today. The primary goal was the stability and prosperity of the Roman state, to res publica. The law was the tool to ensure everyone played their part. It was clear, it was methodical, and for the most part, it was uncompromising. Expected to serve in the army, pay their taxes without complaint, and participate in the civic and religious life of the state. The law wasn't just something that happened to you. It was something you were actively a part of. For example, the head of a Roman family, the paterfamilias, held immense power, literally, life and death, over his children and household. But this power wasn't for his own selfish gain. The law expected him to use it to manage his family's property, arrange good marriages, and ensure the family line continued, all for the greater good of Rome. Failing in these duties could bring social shame and legal trouble. The law protected his authority, but it also demanded his responsibility. Now, let's talk about the other side of the coin. Slavery. It's a dark part of Roman history, and the law was brutally clear on this. A slave was considered property, a race, a thing. They had no personal rights. They couldn't own property. They couldn't marry legally. And their children were also born into slavery. The law defined their limits with chilling precision. A slave's testimony in court was only considered valid if it was extracted under torture. This wasn't seen as cruel, but as a logical necessity because it was believed a slave would only tell the truth if they feared pain more than their master. This obsession with order was perhaps most visible in the Roman army. The legionaries were the most feared fighting force of the ancient world, and their success wasn't just about superior weapons or tactics. Every soldier swore an oath, the sacramentum, a sacred vow of loyalty to their general and to Rome. Breaking this oath was unthinkable. The rules were absolute. Falling asleep on watch, losing your weapon, or showing cowardice in battle could be punished by death. But under the emperors, this definition expanded dramatically. Simply disrespecting the emperor, or even a statue of the emperor, could be interpreted as treason. The punishment was often execution and the confiscation of all your property. Informers were even rewarded for reporting such crimes, which created an atmosphere of paranoia. Why so harsh? An insult to him was an insult to the entire empire, a crack in the foundation of order that had to be sealed immediately. Even minor infractions weren't taken lightly. A baker who cheated his customers on the weight of bread could be fined heavily or even forced into servitude at the public bakeries. The message was that the system relies on everyone doing their part correctly. Any deviation, any mistake that weakened the fabric of society, had to be corrected and made an example of. The law was a deterrent, a giant warning sign posted across the entire empire. So, when we look at Roman law, we see a system that was often brutal and unforgiving by our modern standards. It placed the collective good of the state far above the rights of the individual. Every citizen had duties. Every slave had limits. Every soldier had discipline. The law wasn't a gentle guide. It was a rigid framework, and the punishment for stepping outside that framework was swift and severe. It was a system built for an empire, designed to control millions of people across vast territories. And while it may seem harsh, you have to admit, it worked. It created a stable society that endured for centuries and left a legal legacy that still influences our own laws today. The ideas of written constitutions, of evidence-based trials, of the state having a monopoly on justices, are all echoes of Rome. The Romans understood that to build something that lasts, you need a strong foundation. For them, that foundation was the law. Strict, clear, and powerful. Thanks for joining me on this journey back to ancient Rome. If you found this interesting, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more dives into history. Let me know in the comments what you think was Roman law brilliant, or who's brutal. I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you next time. Wind the clock a few hundred years, and you'll find a very different and much more visceral approach to justice. Imagine a bustling medieval town square. It's the heart of the community, where merchants sell their goods, neighbors gossip, and children play. But on certain days, this lively hub would transform into a theater of justice, or perhaps more accurately, a theater of dread. A wooden scaffold would be erected, and the town crier would announce the day's event. A flogging, a branding, or perhaps the ultimate spectacle, an execution. These were not hidden affairs. They were deliberately public, designed for maximum visibility. Crowds would gather, sometimes numbering in the thousands. It was a day out for some, a grim obligation for others. People from all walks of life, merchants, peasants, even children would be there to watch. Don't cheat, don't challenge authority. The sight of the gallows on the edge of town or the stocks in the main square served as a constant, silent reminder of the state's power. It bypassed the complexities of conscience and went straight for the instinct of self. Of course, this approach had its dark side. It was often disproportionate, cruel. Over time, as ideas about human rights, dignity, and rehabilitation began to take root, these public displays of brutality slowly faded from view in many parts of the world. We began to believe that building a better society required more than just fear. The echoes of public punishment still linger in our culture, from the public shaming that happens online to the debates around the purpose of our modern justice system. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this dive into history interesting, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that might make you rethink everything you thought you knew about ancient justice. We often see these grand portrayals of powerful courts and solemn judges in movies, but the reality for the average person was far from glamorous. In fact, for many, the system wasn't just. It was a terrifying machine designed to maintain the status quo. So, who exactly were the main victims of this harsh system? Let's pull back the curtain. First and foremost, we have to talk about slaves. In many ancient societies, slaves weren't even considered people in the eyes of the law. They were property. This meant their owners could inflict brutal punishments on them with little to no legal consequence. If a slave was accused of a crime, their trial, if they even got one, was a foregone conclusion. Torture was standard procedure to extract a confession, and the punishments were designed to be as brutal and public as possible, a chilling warning to others. Things like crucifixion or being thrown to wild animals in the arena weren't just punishments. They were spectacles of power, reinforcing the absolute control of the ruling class. Next on the list were prisoners of war and rebels. When a city or a territory was conquered, its soldiers and anyone who resisted the new rule were shown no mercy. They were often paraded through the streets in a triumph, a celebration of military victory, before being publicly executed or sold into slavery. For rebels who rose up against the established order, the response was even more severe. The goal wasn't just to punish the individuals, but to crush the spirit of rebellion itself. Mass executions were common, sending a clear and bloody message: defiance will not be tolerated. Justice wasn't about fairness. It was about demonstrating the state's absolute power. But it wasn't just slaves and enemies of the state who suffered. The system was heavily biased against the poor and lower-class citizens as well. Imagine being a poor farmer accused of theft by a wealthy landowner. Who do you think the judge would believe? Without money for legal representation, without powerful connections, your chances were slim to none. The punishments were also clear. A wealthy citizen might get away with a fine for a crime that would see a poor person flogged, exiled, or even executed. This two-tiered system of justice ensured that the social hierarchy remained firmly in place. The law was a tool used by the elite to protect their own interests and keep the lower classes in check. So, what happened when a powerful person, a nobleman or a wealthy merchant, actually committed a crime? Well, more often than not, they got away with it. They had the resources to hire the best orators to argue their case. They could bribe officials, influence witnesses, or call in favors from powerful friends. In many cases, the worst they might face was a temporary exile to their luxurious country estate. Far cry from the brutal fate that awaited a commoner for a much lesser offense. This blatant hypocrisy was a core feature of the system. The laws were written and enforced by the powerful. For the powerful, justice was a commodity, available to those who could afford it. This glaring inequality reveals the true nature of ancient justice. It wasn't about a blindfolded lady holding a set of balanced scales. It was a system of social control, a mechanism for preserving power and privilege. The idea of equal justice for all is a relatively modern concept, and one we still struggle with today. By looking back at the harsh realities faced by slaves, prisoners, and the poor, we can better appreciate the long and difficult fight for a fairer world. It reminds us that justice is not something to be taken for granted. It's something that must be constantly guarded and fought for. Thanks for watching. And if you found this exploration of history interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. See you next time. Have you ever wondered why some of the darkest chapters of history seem to have missing pages? It's not always because the records were lost. Sometimes it's because we chose to forget. Think about it. As societies evolve and our collective sense of morality sharpens, we look back at the actions of our ancestors with a deep sense of shame. Practices that were once commonplace things that would horrify us today become taboo subjects. It's a natural human reaction. We want to distance ourselves from that darkness. To believe we move so far beyond it that it is no longer part of our story. This is where a strange, unspoken agreement begins to form. Historians and writers, perhaps feeling the same discomfort, start to tiptoe around these subjects. They might mention them in passing, but they rarely delve into the gritty, uncomfortable details. Textbooks and schools follow suit. Complicated, shameful events are sanitized, condensed into a single sterile paragraph, or skipped entirely. The curriculum focuses on triumphs, heroes, and progress, creating a narrative that feels good, one that's easier to teach and easier to learn. So, what happens? The memory fades. A generation grows up with only a vague, blurry picture of the past. The raw, emotional weight of these historical atrocities is lost. The names of the victims are forgotten. The suffering is reduced to a statistic. And the complex social and political machinery that allowed these things to happen is never fully dismantled or understood. It's like a family that never talks about a painful secret. The silence doesn't make the secret go away. It just allows the dysfunction to fester beneath the surface. And this is where the real danger lies. Forgetting isn't just a passive act of memory loss. It's an active process of erasure. And by erasing the past, we strip ourselves of our most powerful defense against repeating it. History, in its most brutal and honest form, serves as a warning system. It shows us the warning signs, the slow creep of dangerous ideologies, the way ordinary people can become complicit in extraordinary evil. It teaches us to recognize the patterns. When we don't know the full story, we can't see those patterns emerging in our own time. We might dismiss early signs of intolerance as isolated incidents. We might not recognize the rhetoric that once led to disaster. We become vulnerable to the same old mistakes, dressed up in new clothes. The excuse we didn't know becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we actively chose not to know. We were too ashamed to look, too uncomfortable to learn. This isn't about wallowing in guilt or assigning blame to people long gone. It's about accountability to the present and the future. Acknowledging the ugliest parts of our history is not a sign of weakness. It's a profound act of strength and maturity. It means we're brave enough to confront our own capacity for error, to learn from it, and to build a better world with that knowledge. Forgetting the mistakes of the past is a luxury we simply cannot afford. It paves a smooth, easy road right back to the very places we desperately want to leave behind. The shadows of history are long, and they only grow darker when we refuse to turn on the light. We must have the courage to look back, not with shame that paralyzes us, but with a resolve that empowers us. We owe it to those who suffered, and we owe it to every generation yet to come, to remember. Because only by remembering can we truly ensure that history does not repeat itself. Thanks for watching. If this made you think, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the lessons of the past. See you next time.